Welcome to Season 3 of the TA Table, the official podcast of the Teaching Assistants Training Program at the University of Toronto.
We're your hosts, Estefania Toledo and Elliot Fonarev. And on this podcast, we explore teaching and learning practices and strategies in higher education.
Today, we're excited to bring you something a little bit different. We usually speak with educators at U of T, but today we have our first special guest interview with author and educator Cate Denial.
Dr. Cate Denial is the Bright Distinguished Professor of American History and Director of the Bright Institute at Knox College in Illinois. She's the winner of the American Historical Association's Eugene Asher Distinguished Teaching Award, as well as an educational consultant working with universities across the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, and Australia. Many of you might have already heard about Cate's book. It's definitely on my bookshelf. It's called A Pedagogy of Kindness from the University of Oklahoma Press. This book is an invitation for educators to center compassion in the classroom and in our teaching. We're delighted to bring you an interview with Cate about her ideas and the process of writing this kind of pedagogical scholarship.
We're so excited to have you here to talk about your teaching practice and specifically Pedagogy of Kindness. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me to join you.
I'd like to start by asking, what inspired you to write the book?
So I went to the Digital Pedagogy Lab in 2017, and it was a real moment where a lot of different strands of things that have been happening in my life came together in a giant aha moment. I was in the intro track, which was led by Sean Michael Morris and Chris Friend. And one of the exercises that they had us do was to look at our own syllabus and figure out who we were writing to when we wrote our policies and our descriptions of what was going to happen in the course. And I discovered that who I was writing to was someone I didn't trust at all, that I was very suspicious that they were going to mess up somehow. And I felt like I had to articulate all the things that would happen when they did mess up. I was horrified by this realization. And so I ducked out that very next afternoon and completely rewrote my syllabus and recorded a little, I don't know what to call it, like a little video of myself saying to my students, this is why I teach the way that I do and what I think is important. And then I went back to my home institution of Knox College and put into place everything I had learned. And it just made such a dramatic difference, not only to my students, but to me and my happiness in the classroom. Like all the first day jitters just went away because I was no longer expecting my students to be hostile. So after a couple of years of teaching in this new way, I wrote an essay for hybrid pedagogy called A Pedagogy of Kindness. That was a reflection on what had changed for me since the Digital Pedagogy Lab. And then my colleague, Josh Eiler, reached out to me and said, this needs to be a book. And so in 2020, in June of 2020, what an auspicious moment to launch a book. I signed a contract. And at the time, it was with a different press than the one that ultimately published it. But I said that I would have the book written by September of the next year. That did not happen. There were just a couple of other things that had to take priority, right? And so we changed publishers midstream and all kinds of different things. And eventually the book came out in 2024. But really the roots of it going to that one digital pedagogy lab and having such an incredible experience.
I love that. And I have some questions about your process of writing and the kind of the backdrop of it. But first, I'm sure people are wondering what constitutes kindness, pedagogy of kindness practice. And I'm here in Canada, Canadians are known stereotypically to be nice. And I heard you point out in a different interview that kindness practice and pedagogy is something more than being nice. So I wonder if you could elaborate on that and explain what constitutes a kindness practice.
So I always draw a distinction between kindness and niceness. I live in the American Midwest, and we are also famously nice. But that is not always good because niceness just wants to get along. So niceness will avoid conflict. Niceness will say whatever it needs to just smooth over a situation. Nice is totally happy to lie to your face. Kindness, genuine kindness, however, is about honesty and accountability. It's about taking responsibility for your actions. It means standards and boundaries, right? It means all the things that are inherent to a really good classroom experience. So I start there. And then what a pedagogy of kindness is about: three things, I say: justice, believing students, and believing in students. So the justice part of it is about attending to who our students are when they walk into our classroom or sign on to our online classroom, right? That they are living complex lives along axes of sexuality, gender, disability, religion, citizenship, so many different things, right? They bring all that with them when they walk in the door. Some are first gen, some are queer, some are Indigenous. There's so many different variables at play. People have jobs, people have families, they have care responsibilities and extended kinship networks. And if we're not aware of all of those different dynamics, then we're doing a real injustice to our students when we show up to teach. So that's the first part, really getting comfortable with not only the identities of our students, but our identities and how those things line up and sometimes don't. The second thing is believing students. So we are taught, I think, in higher ed in general, that we should suspect students of something nefarious at all times. They won't do the reading, or they will cheat, or they will plagiarize, or they will not come to class, or they'll try and get their buddy to sign them in for class. All kinds of different things that people suspect them of. And it's just not true that all of our students are sitting there plotting against us. So we need to believe them when they tell us what their educational experience is. And we need to believe them when they do things like say, my printer ran out of ink, or the dog ate my homework, right? Just believe them, because it's about the trust that we build with our students, and not just the student in front of us, but the students in the class and all the people who sit together in the cafeteria or whatever else it is, are on a sports team, hang out in an affinity group. All of those students are going to be part of this web of trust, or not, depending on how we behave. So there's that. And then there is believing in students. And that's believing in their capacity to be collaborators on their own education. And that is about trusting them, again, to be able to step up and do incredible things. We all know, I'm sure, that the banking model of education that Fiore put out there is not how we ideally want to teach. We are not knowledgeable. Our students are not completely without knowledge or experience of their own. It's not about us downloading things from our brains into theirs. It's a co-created process by which we all have some expertise and some knowledge, and we're negotiating around those ideas. So believing in students is so important, and believing in the best of them is really important.
I'd love to hear from the book or from your teaching about a strategy you like to use, and the areas of teaching practice that we can be particularly mindful about establishing a kindness practice.
Yeah, I think one of the best practices that I have in my toolbox and that I talk about in the book is about going to questions, cultivating curiosity rather than statements. So this is especially useful if you are in charge of a discussion about something that has a tendency to get heated, a political issue, right, where people are partisanly divided, something like race, class, sex, gender, disability. All of these things they can pull up a lot of big emotions for a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. And so when someone says something in a class that is off the rails a little bit, or maybe it's just downright offensive, right? Maybe they've really just gone for the offensive thing. To respond with a question instead of a statement opens up some space for discovery and curiosity. So instead of just saying, that's wrong, how dare you, entering into a really hostile and aggressive kind of space, saying, where did you first learn that? And now there is a way that you could say that same question and it would be totally dismissive. Like, where'd you first learn that? But having the right tone and saying, like, where did you learn that? That's really, I'm curious, gives that person space to actually reflect on this is a learned behavior and where did it come from? It gives the rest of the room space, all the other students space to be able to contribute to a conversation. So I love the idea of questions. And this very much comes from the practice of intergroup dialogue, which I learned at the University of Michigan, along with some people from my campus. And so I got to give them credit for a really insightful technique. Another thing is the pause, right? We are often, when we're in a sticky situation in our classrooms, we feel like we have to act immediately. And sometimes the right thing to do is simply to say, I just want us to pause for a second, right? I want to check in with everybody. I feel this way. Does anybody else share that feeling? It's important to acknowledge, as the intergroup dialogue folks say, that emotions walk into the room with us as well as our intellects, right? We are not just brains in jars. And so the pause is important and questions are really important.
It sounds like it can be particularly useful for handling polarized topics in university classrooms. And I also am thinking about mental health on campus and among youth. That's something we're all thinking about. Something at the university, we have a lot of resources, policies, protocols around it. But a lot of educators worry about maybe overstretching their resources or wading too deep in something that they don't have training in, as like social supports. And I'm wondering if you can say more about how a compassionate pedagogy can enter into this picture, and specifically around the notion of care, which you talk about. What does that look like in university teaching and learning?
So I think a basis of what we do has to be that we care about one another, right? But I totally understand where people may feel allergic to that assertion, especially if they're from a group of people who are traditionally relied upon to provide care, often under oppressive conditions. So if you are Black, if you are a woman, if you are this various groups of people who have been traditionally asked to bear the emotional labor in particular for a lot of other people, right? And being asked to care again or more or differently can feel really hard, really difficult, really fraught. So I think that care has to start with kindness towards ourselves. We have to fill our own cups because otherwise we're pouring out. There's nothing to pour out. And that means having really healthy boundaries. It means knowing your community. It means doing things like taking email notifications off your phone. So you can have the email app on there. I'm not saying go cold turkey, but take off the notifications that are constantly pinging you and telling you somebody wants a piece of your time. Choose when you go into your email and when you don't. It's a small thing, but it has such dramatic consequences for the space, the mental space that we all have as educators. Finding community is important, knowing that we are not meant to be isolated. The human condition is not meant to be an isolated one. So identifying where our communities are and really making a point of being an active member of them. They may be in our departments. They may not be on campus, right? But those things are super important. Making time for ourselves, showing ourselves tremendous kindness is the starting point so that then we can show kindness to other people. And kindness towards other people, I think, goes back to the pause again, right? To stopping ourselves before we say or do something that might be absolutely in tune with how we may be exhausted, we may be burned out, right? But taking the pause and saying to ourselves as a discipline, what is the kind thing for me to do here? And so it is genuinely never really the kind thing to do to shoot that email back at a student who said something, asked a question about something that's on the syllabus, right? it is genuinely never a good time to be super sarcastic or mean or quippy with them, right? Because we are frustrated. And that's where kindness really becomes such an act of discipline, an act of pausing, an act of saying, I know what the right thing is to do here. I got to give myself a moment so I can do it, right? And not just act reactively.
Yeah, and this gets into the sort of professional end of the educator's role. You talk about the role of respect in the practice of kindness, and I wonder if you could share more about how do we cultivate that between ourselves and others in our professional relationships? How do we deal with this sort of challenge of compassion when we're dealing with particular difficult people? Is this something that ever comes up?
Comes up all the time. I don't want people to get the idea that I think being kind is easy or effortless. It's not at all. And it's not like I reached some mountaintop and now have been enlightened. That's not it either. I struggle with these things every single day. It is not an expectation that should be placed on anybody that if someone is being cruel or if someone is being oppressive towards you, it is not a requirement that you stand there and let them. That is absolutely not kind, because kindness towards the self dictates that is not a position that we put ourselves in or let ourselves stay in once it has happened. So one of the things I talk about when I talk about classroom management is that if somebody says something in our classroom that is insulting to who we are as a human being, right? Those instances happen. Then it is totally okay to say, okay, I think this is a really hot button moment and we need to pause. So we're done with class for today and expect an email from me later. And then to go find the person who can help, whether that is the counseling service or it's the chair of our department or it is the teaching and learning center, whomever it is, it may be all of those people who can actually step in and give you advice, who can also affirm for you the way you did is right and that you deserve protection and respect. And then work out a plan for going back, right? Work out a plan for what do we say? How do we handle it? Who talks to the student? How do you approach that issue with the whole class? All of those things, right? But standing there and letting someone abuse you is not a requirement of being a teacher on any level. Sometimes we're the person who says the offensive thing in a classroom. We are the person who maybe did not know differently and gets educated by a student about something. Sometimes we are the person who says something inelegantly, and sometimes some people genuinely just want to harm other people. Kindness has as part of it accountability. If you are not willing to be held accountable for the things that you say and that you do, you are not being kind by default. When it is our era, then we need to take responsibility for that, be accountable for it. I think that sometimes I get back to the idea of kindness and niceness. People just think if you can say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I didn't intend to cause harm, that's okay. When that is not the case, that is niceness again, that just expects to be able to skate through a situation without really engaging with what happened. Kindness, on the other hand, takes responsibility, and you have to name the harm. You have to be accountable for the harm. You have to show by your behavior that the harm is not going to happen again. Those things are as true for us as they are for our students. And I think that holding ourselves accountable is one of the kindest things that we can do for those around us as well as for ourselves. Because when we do skate through something, it feels nasty, right? When you feel guilty and you feel weighed down by knowing you've really messed up. So I think that niceness does not serve us well, and that expecting forgiveness or demanding forgiveness, that is not kind. That is definitely part of the whole nice package. Forgiveness, I follow Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, who wrote an incredible book called On Repentance and Repair. It obviously comes from her Jewish background, but you don't need to be Jewish to find that what she says is really important. And one of the things that she says in the book is that there are many steps that people should go through in order to actually repair the harm they have made before they say, I'm sorry, and before they even approach the concept of forgiveness. And that forgiveness is not owed. Forgiveness is not something someone can expect from you. Forgiveness is a gift that you give, and forgiveness can be withdrawn at any point, and it can last a lifetime if that's what's right for you. Rabbi Rottenberg goes into much greater detail about this, but there has to be an acknowledgement that a harm was done. There has to be evidence of change. There has to be a real owning up to why things went wrong. You have to demonstrate that you are a different person who will not make that mistake again, long before you can actually expect anything like forgiveness. I don't think that forgiveness is necessarily part of kindness. I think that forgiveness is its own creature, and that when we mix up ideas about forgiveness and compassion, that is when we get into a very messy, slippery situation.
And when it comes to practice in the classroom, do you hear from educators any challenges to implementing a pedagogy of kindness, and how would you suggest preparing for these?
So I think that one of the biggest challenges, especially if you're at a large research institution, is the size of classes. So if you have 400 people, 500 people in a lecture setting, then kindness means something different than it does for me. I'm in a liberal arts college. My largest class is 30 students. I can implement kindness in a very different way. So I think there's a sense of a situational sense of what is appropriate that's very important. But I also think that there is a sense in which we can do small things that make a real difference. So how do we think about late policies, for example? Let's take something really concrete. A lot of people are like, I have 500 students. I cannot be chasing down everybody who says, I want 2 days more, I want 3 days more, whatever. It's a logistical struggle to be able to be kind in those situations. But it's also about planning. So before a semester starts, I put on my calendar times that I will do my feedback to my students about their papers. And I always put extra slots the week after the paper has been handed in. I ideally have that first week where if everybody got it in on time, I'm going to move through all of those things and I'm going to respond. They're going to get feedback from me very quickly. But then if there are people who genuinely need that extension, I have time already blocked off on my calendar, but long before all the other meetings and responsibilities I have come into play. And so I have the ability to be flexible and to be kind in those situations. So it's a logistical nightmare trying to deal with 500 students on all of their different needs, but it's also a logistical solution that can be kind in that sort of situation.
And that sounds also kind to yourself, because you're planning how you're going to balance your time for yourself, for your work, and what you can maybe say no to.
Exactly. And I wish that someone had told me this when I was first starting out as a teaching assistant. I had 120 students every semester, and I was drowning. I was drowning in midterms and papers, and it was so overwhelming. And I wish that someone had told me, put this on your calendar. Do it now before we walk into the first lecture. Get it on there. Give yourself breaks. Tell yourself there's no way you're going to grade all of these in 2 nights. All kinds of planning information would have been so welcome and saved me so much trouble that I got myself into the first couple of semesters that I was teaching.
I think a lot of people listening to this can relate and would love that advice. Just for context, U of T has its very large research institution. Some of the first year classes are 1,000, 800, multiple hundreds of people in classes. And one of the things that everyone is dealing with right now is AI, the big question of how that's changing quality control. And I've heard from a lot of teaching assistants and instructors, and in my own experience too, that things are shifting to just trying to figure out if AI is being used, and it's taking away from maybe some of the pedagogical values and goals. Now I'm thinking about enforcement. Do you think that a kindness pedagogy could be useful for this moment where the worry about AI and plagiarism is really at a high?
Yeah. I think this is a work in progress for everybody. This is changing so fast on the daily that I don't think anybody who offers a lockstep solution is being real about it. We're all trying to figure it out at the same time, and it's just happening so fast. I think that this work is best done in the smallest units that we can. So it's not best done in a 1,000 person lecture, right? That needs to be in a lab section or a discussion section where the work is done to actually think about how is it permissible or not permissible to use AI. And it takes time. And I think that a lot of people want to not give it time and yet not have it have any effect on their classroom. And the two things just don't go together. For instance, one of the ways that I have my students think about generative AI, which I ban in my classes, is that we read an article from a Substack that's called Ultra Processed Minds. And it's about what we lose out when we stop reading and when we stop writing and we stop thinking because we're not doing those things. I have my students read that as homework and annotate it. And I ask them to look up any words they don't know and in a dictionary and come back with definitions. And then we have a really robust conversation about what it said. And we surface all kinds of things that are going on for them that otherwise get brushed under the rug. So they understand that the pandemic really interrupted their learning. They understand that they're having trouble with reading. They understand that their attention span is not what it once was, and they're not satisfied with that situation, but nobody is teaching them how to move from where they are to the next spot. So I start out by seeding the conversation with that. And then my students do a lot of readings that from various news organizations about ethical issues around generative AI in particular, environmental problems, labor issues, the way that racism and gender discrimination are built into these systems, thinking about the fact that they're based on stolen property, thinking about the fact that they are trying to generate a profit, not to actually help people, right? Their bottom line is to generate a profit at all costs. So we read a lot of news articles about this, and then we have a conversation about these ethical concerns around generative AI. And then we move on to talk about disinformation. And especially for my students who are historians, that's a really big problem. If you think you have a source and it turns out it's AI generated, then your whole argument just falls to pieces. And so how do we be diligent? How do we check our sources? How do we make sure we're corroborating what we're finding? Those kinds of questions. Having all these conversations takes time. I have a class period, or I've had a class period for the last couple of years that is an hour and 45 minutes long to do all of this work. If you're in a big R1 institution, probably you've got like a 50-minute discussion section or something, right? So it's going to take more than one to get through these conversations about generative AI. But if we are not willing to give it a couple of section times, then we set ourselves up for the horrible situation of being in forces, where we're policing our students and we are trying to work out, did someone get better or has this been run through ChatGPT? So for me, we've got to give it time if we want to be able to make sure that we can stay true to our values and what we really want to be at the center of our pedagogy.
And going back to pedagogy of kindness and practices in the classroom, do you ever deal with resistance from students? Maybe they're used to a certain way of learning. Maybe they're asked to change how they even approach being in the classroom. How do you then bring students on board?
I think the place where I see that the most often is when it comes to grading, because I have moved to an ungrading framework where my students get a lot of feedback from me, but they don't get letters or numbers on their papers and assignments. We have a conversation about that too at the beginning of the term, where I tell them why I do it this way. And I invite them to talk about what are their anxieties around it? How is this different from what they've had in other classes? How is it different from high school? So many of my students are in high schools now where they're getting grade updates minute by minute all day and invited to go check how they got 3 more points or they lost 2 points or whatever it is. The amount of stress and anxiety that creates in them. And the only way they're taught to manage it is to continue to strive to get an A. And the system tells them that A is what everybody's going to get, and then you mess up and get something lower. You get demerits. So I tried to shift that conversation. And when I was first doing ungrading, I tried to shift it to, okay, you do the work, that's expected of you. That is a C. And then you earn up from there by doing even better. It's not a situation where you're losing points and someone is taking something away from you, right? And then we also get into conversations about the physical toll that grades take on them and the mental toll that those things take on them. And trying to make a space for, okay, but if you're someone who really depends on extrinsic motivation, what other extrinsic motivation can we put in place other than getting a grade, a letter or a number on the end of your paper? So again, it takes time. I strongly believe that our pedagogies need to be transparent. Our students should be able to ask us at any time, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this way? And we should have an answer for them. And just saying that's the way that I was taught is not good enough. I really think, again, that this comes back to taking the time to actually pull back the veil and make it super clear why things work as they do. And we've got to invest that time if we want the payoff of a certain kind of classroom.
Do you have any examples of how students have responded? What feedback do you get?
Overwhelmingly, the students have a positive experience. A lot of them are nervous at the beginning. They're nervous that they won't know how they're doing. And they discover, oh no, you know how you're doing because I'm giving you feedback all the way. But it also means that you break up with your partner of 3 years the night before we're doing some big project. That is not going to tank you. That's a moment that we can isolate at the end of term and say, wow, that was really tough. Let's look at how you recovered from that. Let's look at where your progress has been since then. Let's look at how you overcame that situation. There's room to acknowledge that we are living profoundly complicated and messy human lives. So I have not had any students who have vocalized to me either in their student evaluations or in conversation or in their final reflective papers, because I have them do metacognitive final reflective papers. I don't have anybody who has said, wow, I wish I had letter grades the whole way through this. That doesn't mean that all of them are all comfortable all the time, but discomfort is a part of getting up to your learning edge. So it's not that I'm trying to get rid of all discomfort, it's that I'm trying to there be useful friction.
And I'm wondering if you have any specific advice for teaching assistants or course instructors who are just starting out, maybe. Where can they begin?
I think the most important place to begin is to not look at students as your enemies. And it's not that I think that anybody is naturally inclined to do that, but I think higher ed teaches us that implicitly. The culture of higher ed does. So by the time you are a graduate student and you're walking into your own classroom, you've already gone through an undergraduate experience where many people would have viewed you with suspicion. And there would have been classroom policies that taught you, oh, they don't trust me. So then you replicate it because you think that's what you should do. And then we wonder why our classrooms don't feel like comfortable spaces where we feel like there's hostility or resentment. Of course there is. We felt that same resentment ourselves when we weren't trusted as undergraduates. But because that's the only example that we've had, it's really hard unless somebody does what happened to me and said, why are you doing it that way? And you have to defend it, that you're like, oh, I don't know why I'm doing it this way. This is just received, quote unquote, wisdom that I am replicating. So look at the students with the benefit of trust. It takes away the animosity. It takes away those jitters. It gives you space to be human yourself. It makes it a more pleasant experience to be in a classroom. So I think that is the biggest thing that people can do is do not let the culture of higher ed tell you that students are nefarious, no good people. Give them the benefit of the doubt, give them your trust, and they will repay it.
I want to now turn back to writing A Pedagogy of Kindness. I'd really love to hear more about your process of writing and Had you done pedagogical scholarship before?
So I had written pedagogical articles before, shorter pieces, mostly about history pedagogy. I'd also written a lot on my blog about history pedagogy. So I was used to thinking critically about those issues. When it came to write the book, I had to be very disciplined. I had to be like, the first thing I'm going to do every day is I'm going to sit at my computer and write for some period of time. It's not like I said it has to be an hour or whatever it was, but it did have to be my morning routine. And that's because I am sharpest first thing in the morning. If I was sharp at 4 p.m, as some of my colleagues are, then that would have been the time that I would have set aside to be able to do something. But it really was repetitive, and I did it even on the days when I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. Sometimes I would write 25 words, and sometimes it would be 1,000. There was no predicting how it was going to go. But I had to make it a commitment because there were so many other things going on in the world, in my life, in my teaching career, that if I didn't make that disciplined commitment, it was never going to get done. So I wrote the book in about 6 months and sent it off to my editors. And one of my editors came back and said, basically, that 4th chapter is no good. So I had taken a little time between turning it in, right, and getting the feedback. And I was able to go back and read it and go, oh, wow, you were right. Like, I was like, when we had our Zoom meeting after I got my editor's comments, I was like, you're right. Chapter 4 is off the rails. I'm so sorry. And it was very much that I was just exhausted by that point. And so I had just written to get something out there and meet the word count, and it was terrible. So I actually was amused by this, like how bad it was at first. And so then I was able to go back and go, okay, I know what I need to do. I know what I actually want to say. I didn't say any of it. I just got wildly distracted and my prose went on vacation. So I did revisions for about 3 months. I had reviewers' notes as well as my editor's notes, and they were super, super helpful. And I have always loved a good editor because it is such a gift to be somebody who can look at someone else's prose and say, oh, this is what needs tweaking. You haven't quite articulated X, but I can see you want to. That's a real gift. So yeah, I revised for about 3 months. And I was really glad to just send it off at that point. It's not unlike writing a PhD dissertation, where by the time you are done, you can't bear to look at it anymore, where you're just like, a done dissertation is a good dissertation and vice versa. So I sent it off. It went through a production process that was quite lengthy. And the great thing about that process is that there were pockets of time where I was not thinking about it and I was doing anything else. And then I had to copy edit, or there were questions from the copy editor, or I had to pay for an indexer, or all kinds of things where I was going to keep coming back to that manuscript. And that was really a rewarding experience to be able to craft it. And it was rewarding to have the downtime when I wasn't thinking about it too. So I think those are, in general, good principles. There's got to be a discipline to it because we all have so many demands on our time. But there also have to be periods where you put it in a drawer and you don't look at it, whether that's 2 days, right? Or whether it's 3 months. There needs to be time when you walk away from it because you've got to let it percolate. You have to be able to think new thoughts about it. And that was what I was eventually able to do. When they came back and said the 4th chapter's no good, I'd had time to walk away, and then I could look at it with fresh eyes and go, yep, absolutely right. So let's get on that.
And I'm curious, like, in our disciplinary fields, we have our sources, our empirical source material for pedagogy. Did you draw on your teaching experiences in memory? Were you recording and keeping that reflexive practice and examples throughout your teaching? How did that come into play?
The book is a odd fusion of many different kinds of approaches to writing and thinking, I think, because part of it is autobiographical, part of it is a manifesto, part of it is very grounded in a whole lot of research. The things I'm recommending are backed by tremendous research. So weaving those different disparate parts together was sometimes a real challenge. But it was also super rewarding to write outside the boundaries that I was used to. I am used to spending hours to craft a paragraph for history papers, books, my first book, because you are putting in that footnote every last scrap of evidence. And you can't make an assertion without saying, no, but back up. Here's where my assertion comes from. It's really grounded. When I was talking about my teaching practices, it was based on memory. I did not have any formal practice of journaling or keeping records. So being able to go to the spaces that were memory and being able to go to the spaces that were autobiographical was really delightful. To be able to just say, there isn't a disciplinary approach here that is going to match what I need this book to do. So I'm just going to fuse a bunch of things and let's see where it takes us. And that was really rewarding.
How has the reception of the book been among educators?
It has been very warmly received. Now, I will say that if somebody really hates it, I'm not going to know, right? Because I'm not seeking out reviews. I think that what other people think of my book is entirely their business. So I'm not trying to keep tabs on everybody's opinions. And when I do workshops and when I travel and I give keynotes, the people who are most opposed to the kinds of ways that I teach are not going to come. So I'm going to meet the people who receive it warmly. So that is something to take into account. But I have been to more than 100 different campuses at this point to do either workshops or keynotes or both. I have had the most wonderful conversations with so many people at every kind of campus, from little ones like mine to enormous, like big community colleges that are providing services to half of Texas or something, big research institutions, little regional state colleges, all kinds of different places. And I've worked with people in Australia and the United Kingdom and Ireland and Canada, as well as the United States. What was most surprising to me about the reception that the book got was how many people felt like they had been given permission to do a thing that they always wanted to do. And that was what the book was for them. They always wanted to not be the hard ass. They didn't want to be that distrustful teacher, but the culture of higher ed convinced them they needed to be. And instead, my book said, that is not how it has to go down. And that people were like, thank you for the permission. Now, I didn't know that's what I was doing. It would be really presumptuous and weird of me to be like, let me go out and give everybody permission to do a thing. But that was what surprised me, was how many people came up and said, thank you. This really affirms something I wanted. And I think that if I did anything, it was put into words something that was maybe a little nebulous for some people, and be able to articulate why it matters in a way that people were looking for.
Yeah, it really resonated with our team. We actually have a few workshops and resources where we implement ideas of a compassionate pedagogy and pedagogy of kindness. So it's really wonderful to have a chance to speak with you. And I just want to give you another, maybe a final word of advice or a resource that can be helpful for educators.
I think as a resource, I would point people toward the series at the University of Oklahoma Press that my book is part of, because there are so many incredible, talented, thoughtful, kind people writing books in that series. I've learned tremendous amounts from all of them. And it's nice to be able to say, go to this place. Everything that is coming out of this series is worth your time. It's like the old advice I got when I was a graduate student about, like, where do you pitch your first book? And it was like, look at your bookshelf. Where is the majority of your books from? That should tell you where you need to pitch things. The same is true of the incredible collection at the University of Oklahoma. So I want to give them a really big shout out, especially because they are wonderful people to a last one.
Amazing. And yeah, we'll put the links in our show notes to the resources you mentioned and, of course, to your book. Where can people find more about you?
I have a website, catedenial.org. There's a blog there that has teaching reflections going back several years. It's also where I have a really long bibliography that is incomplete, but that I am keeping track of, pieces that point out the ethical problems with generative AI. So that's a resource I would love for people to be able to use. You can find me at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and you can find some of the stuff about me on their website too. I am on Blue Sky as Cate Denial, and I think that's pretty much everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me. This was really a delight.
That's our episode for today. If you like what you heard or have questions, comments, or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to Dr. Cate Denial for being on our show. We really appreciate the conversation, and we'll put links to Kate's book and where to find her in the show notes.
Thanks so much for that conversation, Elliot. We're super excited to bring you the rest of the season and hope that you'll tune in to the rest of the episodes for this season. Until next time.